Okay.
It will be big enough for
Put it here.
PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
It will be fine.
But look closely. We want to have about 80% on the screen. 80% on the screen.
Exactly. Pretty much.
Move a bit up. No, because we're not able to see all the screen.
You can give a try.
I'm concerned that's much further than we usually do that.
And then
I think
we'll
the
then we'll
PowerPoint
move.
will be large enough.
No. Wait, 80% of the screen. This is less than 50% of the screen.
Let's get more of the screen and
Okay.
not so much of me.
Okay.
Okay.
Our distinguished speaker is Christina Sakamoto. Will you talk a little bit about your background at the beginning so I won't try?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. I'm Christina. I was born in Brazil, but I'm Japanese, and then I came to Chicago, to pursue my PhD, and then I met Professor Clark, and then the first few meetings that we had, we started already talking about this question, and that was like all the way back in 2011. So it's been 13 years. And I remember at that time it was already maybe a 10 or 20-year-old question for you. And I decided to, try to explore this, or not. I'm not gonna say try to find answers because it's very hard. But we definitely explored a lot this topic. It took me about 9 years to finish my PhD, so this has been like a 9-year exploration of the topic. So the research question is, what is driving economic growth in American cities? Jobs or the arts? No, we are. Oh yeah, can you move? I'm moving on my computer, thinking that it's gonna move there. It's not. Thinking about the arts as a driver of economic change or growth, as people move to the city because they find that city living is very interesting. They have like a lot of things to do, entertainment, places to go, and we have kind of a bi-directional relationship between arts and industries in the U.S. We have people that move for employment, they get a job, and then they go to a new place, whatever there is. It could be like in the middle of Alaska because there's a oil drilling field there that's new, and they're gonna make a lot of money. Or people can move because they have personal interests, like arts and entertainment, and they just want to enjoy what the city has to offer. Of course, neither of them is for everybody, but it's yes, yeah. It's a question that we can ask and try to explore here. Do people follow jobs that are then followed by the arts? So for example, you have, can you press like maybe 8 times your enter? Yeah. So it would go something like that. Right, so we have the arts that can revitalize neighborhoods, will make a rundown neighborhood looking a little bit better. Then that would attract new inhabitants, and that means more consumers. Then you have more businesses, no more coffee shops, and then more theaters, more everything. And then you have jobs that come with those businesses, or we have jobs that are going to create more business. They're coming after these consumers, and then it's going to attract more inhabitants, and that's going to revitalize the neighborhoods even further, and then bring more arts in. So, what direction? Can you press again, please? What direction is it going to go? It's arts attracting jobs, or jobs attracting arts? So my methodology is based on the U.S. Census data. It's called the County Business Patterns. I have worked really hard into making all urban areas in the U.S. comparable because they're not comparable as by the census. And I have 19 years of data that maybe could be turned into more like 23 years of data or so. Now that we have more data out. I've analyzed this into 5 square hexagons. They're only inside urban areas that are using zip code level data. If you want to explore more of this, I recommend going to my chapter 2 and 3, but I also don't recommend doing that. Can you go to the next slide, please? So for the statistical modeling that we have here, we worked from the beginning with cross-like regressions, which means that for each pair of years, we use 2 variables. So usually a regression is very cross-sectional, and you're going to see one variable affecting another in one single point in time. But here we are actually looking into 4 years because we see what the difference between 1 year and the second year happened here, and the last and the one before the last year happened on this other side, and how the arts are affecting jobs and how jobs are affecting arts. And we do this these 2 regressions at once, and then we are comparing the gamma coefficients there. They're like the 2 crossed lines in this diagram, and we find that if which one is the biggest one, and whatever it is, that's the one that's dominating the theme here. If it's arts attracting jobs or jobs attracting arts. So I've done like thousands and thousands of these regressions based on different art segments, different job segments, different urban areas, all sorts of things that I'm gonna show later.
Yeah, I want to understand in your fixed effects. I just want to understand your methodology. Yeah, you were looking for arts and jobs. Yeah.
Yes.
And you were controlling for the rest.
Yes.
So the rest would be at the mean.
Yes. Yeah. Right. As long as it was more or less significant, it wasn't that important. And then in the end, go back. Sorry. And then in the end, I had to run a bunch of meta-analysis because imagine you have 19 years of data, and for each pair of years we had a pair of coefficients. So I needed to reduce that number and summarize it in a way that we could make sense of it as humans because it's way too much data. Like the data was just generating more data. So I did the fixed effects meta-analysis, meaning that I could compare every single pair of regression that could compare to each other like perfectly because it comes from the same sample, same source, same everything. And I would find one single results for each pair of years at least in the least. Okay, now we can move on. So let's keep in mind here that the null hypothesis is that jobs attract arts, and then the alternative hypothesis is that arts attract jobs. So if one is not working, then the other should work. And we are looking for the size of the impact. Comparing the 2 gamma coefficients for each pair of regressions, and whatever is larger will be considered as having the bigger impact on the other one. So what's in the arts that I'm talking about here? These are counts of jobs that are taken from a sample by the census. So in the entire country, every year they're asking companies like how many jobs you have in this specific category, and they classify it by the NAICS, which is like the industry classification system. And we can summarize it as, also from Professor Clark's writings and papers, what amenities are, which are, could be buildings like opera houses, museums, art galleries, libraries, or events, or scenic locations, parks, the sea, restaurants, bars, nightclubs, and, cultural districts in city centers. And that's why, because of this cultural district definition, that's why I was trying so hard to fit the data into equal areas that could be comparable across all urban areas in the U.S. And then
let me interrupt for 1 second. This next classification is very, very similar in the entire world. Most countries, China, France, Italy, etc., have very, very similar categories. And this is a largely ignored source by most social scientists. Most economists, most urban economists do not know about this. And they use county level data for an entire county, whereas to get down to a much smaller area adds much larger numbers of cases and more homogeneity within a neighborhood. So basically it's a much smaller neighborhood instead of a map. Take all of Cook County and put together Bridgeport, Evanston, Hyde Park, Bronzeville are one unit for most urban political scientists and sociologists. There are one or two which have used this. Mario Small and I discovered this about simultaneously. It wasn't, in those days, it wasn't published. It was only electronically available, or earlier, when we started, they were only on CDs. You'd send a check for $300. You'd wait for 3 months. You'd get back a couple of CD-ROMs, and then they were very hard to use. And so it has gotten better and better and more. But the point is, it's such rich data, especially for new social movements. Would you even want to mention, just in passing, that is not because of the data you may have analyzed, but it includes, I think, 12 types of new social movements in terms of feminism, in terms of human rights. I think there's ecological groups, political groups, foundations. That is, these are jobs in these areas, including the location of headquarters and the numbers of persons working in new social movements.
Is it here? Maybe not, because these are only the arts categories that I have. These are the 3 arts categories that I separated the variables into, as arts amenities and producers and recreation, but I don't think I have those.
Yeah, there are a couple of published papers that do feature the new social movements.
Okay. So in the next one, so to define what's in jobs, then it's every arts industry category. So if it's not in that list that I just showed, then it's considered as jobs. I have 3 general variables for jobs, and one is the general non-arts category, which is just under the term jobs. Then I wanted to explore what was happening with business services as a special industry that has a special relationship with the arts, because they tend to support the arts a lot, and with sponsorships and grants and so on, and high-tech jobs, because at the time they were writing this, high-tech was super in boom, and how all these artists were gathering around high-tech. So we
But let me interrupt with a second here. Here we have the arts and jobs interrelated. That is, the potential interpretation she just gave you was the jobs in the arts drive the arts within the high-tech jobs. The second alternative is people who feel more attracted by the arts and who want to work for Google and who are interested in thinking about, or that is the people who the director of Apple, what's it called, Apple, well, certainly it's the music, but it's much bigger than music. It's many other things. And Apple stopped hiring MBAs and they hired Masters of Fine Arts to show the interpenetration and a sense that the consumer of who is choosing sites on the competitive internet, who is competing for. I mean, what the front page headline of financial stuff right now is TikTok is being forced to be sold by the Chinese to the U.S. This is big stuff, and so that is really the consumers driving that. So it's the interpenetration of these dynamics which you can add. But sorry.
Right. Okay. So going forward. Okay. So, in the widest analysis, the most simple one, I compared 1998 with 2016, and then we see that the arts have a very strong pull for non-arts jobs, and jobs didn't have that big of a effect on the arts. But, I also realized that the results varied from year to year, industry to industry. Both sides of the cycle happened at the same time, and I was very puzzled by many years, asking what is going on here. What's the dynamic of this shoe? The next one, yeah. So this is first analysis graph that I can show you with some comparison of the 3 different arts categories that I built and the jobs like in the umbrella category in general. And here we can see that the arts amenities, which are performing arts, theaters and things like that, they had the biggest pool of non-art jobs than any other arts category, and also like total arts, because then its impact get diluted when we have like the total category of the arts. So this to me was very interesting. Can you go to the next one?
Can I ask
Sure.
a quick question about this one?
Yeah.
If you look at the graph, right?
Yeah.
In 2008, when we had the big financial crisis, art is hitting rock bottom, and
Yes.
it's in 2013 when it was coming back from, so art has a connection, with the economy,
Yes.
When we have crashes in the economy, art is the one that suffer the most.
Yes. Thank you
Is
so much for saying yes.
Is that correct, Professor?
I wrote about this in my chapter. Yeah, when times are good, the businesses, they want to sponsor, they want to throw money at the arts and say like, look, we're not that evil, like we're great, we're good people, like we sponsor the arts here, theater, the ballet and operas and so on. But then when times are bad, like a financial crisis, then definitely the arts suffer. The first thing that they cut is the sponsorships. So definitely, the biggest drop there. So thank you for pointing that out.
So you think that because that's going to be your dependent variable, which means it's affecting your dependent variable before we start the experiment, yeah?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
So are we going to take this quantitative piece out of it in the results? Because if not, it will be a bit screwed, no? What it is? I'm asking.
It would just stay there. It's not something that I'm isolating. It's just being shown over time, so we can analyze it exactly like that.
And as she said, she's done 1,000 different ways of cutting it, of using this slice as this is time 1, time 2, this slice is here, or 5-year groups, 2-year groups, the whole period, et cetera, et cetera. So she's done a million variations.
And even here, it's showing that arts amenities, one arts amenities, it's adding about, it's calling into the city about 6 non-arts jobs. So on average, like SMD means the standardized mean difference, which is the result from all the meta-analysis. You know, like for each point, I have a couple of coefficients. And in order for me to like show it like this, I had to compress it using meta-analysis to just show 1 point. Otherwise, we would have like 100 points or 500 points.
It's fantastic. Yeah, I like it.
Thank you. So in the next slide, we're comparing the other way, the effect of jobs on arts. And here we see that the coefficients of jobs to the arts is very, very small, like 0.07. That's about 14 jobs that you need to make a city attractive to another artist. So if we are thinking about jobs on arts amenities, that's 0.01, so we need about 200 people. In addition to the current population of a city to attract one more artist in one of the arts amenities category. You know, this is a very wild statistical generalization, but you know, that's what that number would theoretically mean. Yeah, so I've observed that the jobs on arts amenities, because the number of jobs is usually much, much larger than the number of arts amenities jobs, then we have that very, very small coefficient, meaning that I would call it the critical mass effect or an audience effect. So you need a certain audience in the city in order for another theater to come by. Otherwise, you know, who's that theater presenting to? Again, wild generalization. Okay, so in this case, I'm comparing the arts as a most general category to non-art jobs, also the general category, to business services and high-tech and then internet jobs. So we see that 2008 drop, like you pointed out, in all of them here. We see definitely an impact there for business services. So all the financial services suffered with this. In general, you know, one artist is attracting like 3.5 non-arts jobs. But for business services, that's 1.3, which is very, very high. If we look, for example, at the internet jobs, that at this time, it was still very low. So it still needed a way bigger internet audience to attract artists in this case. Okay. The next one, here we are seeing the reverse effect. This is jobs on arts, and we see here about the same. You need about 14 non-arts jobs to attract one more arts job to a city. And the internet jobs and the high tech, that's a very interesting case because you need 4 high tech jobs to attract the arts, which is it's very interesting for this time period. It means that these people might be consuming arts a little bit more intensively than other industries. That's why it's so low. Okay, so here I separate the effects of arts on jobs and jobs on arts by the size of the urban area. We had about 400 urban areas in this study, and 61% of them showed that an arts effect on jobs, so meaning that the arts had a bigger impact than jobs had. of these 294, 47 they were part of the top 50 largest urban areas in the U.S. And then you would expect, the smaller urban areas should not have that big of an impact, but they also did. Like most of even the bottom tier, like the smaller urban areas, they had over 50% of them having an impact of a positive impact of the arts. That's not the case when we look at business services and high tech. That goes a little bit lower than 50%, but still a pretty good proportion of all these urban areas have high impacts of the arts on jobs, and to a secondary degree jobs effects on arts. So it means that for a tiny industry in comparison, the arts do have an impact even in small cities. And these are the effect sizes by industry. This is just so we can compare, like you were saying, the arts amenities, maybe 6. One artist is attracting like 6 of other industries in general in the urban areas, and that's a huge deal. Because if you look at recreation, for example, it's like 3.8. Like all arts combined, like it keeps going down. And we also see that you need the biggest audience increase in order for jobs to attract arts to a city. And, when a crisis happen, then the arts amenities are the first ones to suffer a bigger loss. But the other arts industries are also important in this effects.
Question?
Yeah. Question. Based upon what you said that the biggest urban areas had more impact in arts, yeah? It was 60%, yeah?
More, 90%.
90%, yeah?
Yeah.
And my question to you is, do you have a reason for that?
The volume of people.
But we study in this course that we read Tocqueville, and small cities, we learn about democracy, how people meet each other in the small cities, and that how they trusted each other. Does this mean because in small cities people tend to trust each other and they meet with each other more, they go less to the theater and they do less things that people will do in Chicago, Philadelphia?
Good question.
I would say that some of these arts businesses they need a certain volume of attendance to be supported. If they are not selling like that many tickets or that many like fees, then they cannot exist. And sometimes in smaller cities they just don't have that number. So I think that there's a volume equation here too. Like you need a certain number of population in order to be able to have those.
But wouldn't that affect also, would be made true Americans, the ones that live in big urbans?
Absolutely.
But from the cultural point of view, they will be true Americans because these people will get exposed more to arts?
There is, yes. For example, big part of my husband's family, they do not want to come to Chicago. They don't want to come here. They don't like parking here, so they don't care about going to the opera or anything. My husband, on the other hand, decided that he wanted to move to Chicago so he could enjoy all these things, right? So absolutely, there's 2 types of Americans, maybe.
And the arts are highly skewed in their distribution across U.S. cities. And that if you take all the zip codes, there are many of the small places that have 0 opera, 0, special kinds of theaters and so forth. And so in that sense, that's above and beyond just the density. It's the type of specialized specialized, sophisticated audiences, which say, you know, I'll only live in New York, Chicago, and L.A. and nowhere else. Period. And say for say ballet, for instance. And so, some of the university towns in a Austin, Texas, would bring in one or two performances of something that might come from New York or Chicago, but in that sense, the normal driver, and especially when you add quality, when you have the best opera and the best stars, people will fly here from Switzerland. They'll fly here from Japan to come to one performance in Chicago or New York, and that's this kind of sophisticated audience, and they don't go to a small city which is a poor opera by comparison. So in that sense, it's very hard. We've tried to measure the quality of these for years, and it's very hard. It's easy for baseball because you've got baseball ratings, but when you get to things like opera, it's much harder. But on a qualitative, so this is a rationale for saying every method has its strengths and weaknesses, and we're getting this with great sophistication, but it doesn't have what she does bring into the thesis and her presentation. She can talk about individual cases which illustrate the kinds of points, shows you where she has thought about these issues and looked for ways of trying to capture it. That clearly this is an effect, but it may not be measurable with the same kinds of methodology that she's used with this huge. That is, how many people have written about the arts in political science, or most of them? That is, I wasn't working on the arts at all until we started. We discovered it by chance, critiquing Putnam, and so it was totally unexpected. I had no hypothesis we'd find this, and bang, nobody's studying this, and there's still a handful of people in social science, including especially economists, or a handful. We're talking about amenities and clean air, but there are very few in the arts. Okay, sorry. Go.
So, yeah, okay, let's move on to the next one. So I wanted to show you this, the entire map of the U.S. And the urban areas that I've studied, and the red ones are where arts attract jobs, and the blue ones are where jobs attract arts. The green ones are not significant, and if it's gray, didn't have data to process it. Anywhere that you know?
So the blue is the one that jobs attract.
Yes.
Art, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but look at the big cities like the Northeast. Yeah, you got the Florida where you got the people who are retired, right? You got the Chicago area, Chicagoland. You got Detroit line, yeah.
Most of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then the other areas of
you start getting like middle-sized urban areas, or like the smaller sized ones that have jobs attracting arts the most.
So the rural areas is rural against urban here. What we see, is that correct?
Not so much, because there are many
like
small urban ones.
Like that's Atlanta.
Yes, that big one in Georgia is Atlanta.
Yeah. Huh?
So one that I can talk to you about is like Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I've been there a lot because that's where my husband's from, and they started like building a cultural district downtown, and they have this bridge that is not a useful bridge because it has like a hole in the middle, but like it's a piece of art, like right in the middle of downtown, and they transformed the old train station into like some shopping mall and things like that. Even though it's not like of global proportions, like you're talking about like quality, it is like the local taste and what people feel like and they think like, and it's all represented in these art pieces all over downtown. So it makes sense that to me that Sioux Falls is a red.
But that's the oil industry, what, in North Dakota, right?
There's
they got a lot of money in the last years from oil in North Dakota, yeah.
South Dakota, they have a lot of gambling is one, financial services is another one. So they do have good industries there. Like Citibank is there, and like medical services.
Citibank.
It's very, very heavy in medical services. Yeah. So I wouldn't say it's so much rural and urban, one against the other. I'd say that it's more like you know, what is being developed in that place. If there's still, you know, like an oil drill being developed in one of these cities, then yeah, jobs are gonna still attract more.
Like west of the Mississippi, look, west of the Mississippi, yeah, what, like 20%? West of the Mississippi is a big difference.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so if we look in the next one, then it starts getting a little bit funnier. It's not, okay, so in this one here, the orange means not significant because I'm using like another, like they were done in different times, so like my patterns didn't match. Blue is arts attract jobs. Green is jobs attract arts. And it's more or less the same thing. I'm sorry, it's not jobs, this is business services. Only like financial services, law, accounting, advertising firms, more specifically business services, like those businesses that are more likely to sponsor arts. Okay. And this is arts and high tech. There's some interesting things here. For example, like LA and New York, they show that jobs attract arts, but Chicago is still arts attracting these high tech jobs, and it is more or less like an exception among the big cities, the bigger ones.
And we're doing simultaneously an oral history of Chicago. So so Chicago and the University of Chicago had no interest in the arts 30 years ago, and when Saul Bellows' novel, it said, "Without O'Hare, it's sheer despair." That is the idea. You had to go to New York, or you had to go to Paris or London if you wanted art and culture. Daily 2 reversed that within a huge, or building on Jane Byrne's 4 months of celebration of the arts and activities, has drastically changed the city, and that's a major driver of this. And I've presented this to foundations and people in city government, and at the beginning of the conversation, and the Federal Reserve, we put on a session. Ed Glazer and I did a session with the Federal Reserve Bank, and said the same thing. And we had 60 tough economists, and their instinct was the opposite. At the end of the day, about a third of them had really converted, and a third of those economists in one day, we couldn't believe it.
Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is like an interpretation of the reciprocal effects. To me, it just looked like the arts, it does present a multiplier effect on non-art jobs, meaning that one artist is capable of bringing a bunch more of the other non-arts jobs to a city. As the arts grow, other industries might also be growing as well. And you know, on the other hand, we have that non-arts jobs, they have a sort of an audience effect, that you need a certain volume of population of you know, living in a place or building a place in order for the artists to be able to sustain themselves in that place. Usually the coefficient is between 0 and 1, so that's why I find like 14 non-art jobs is required to have one more artist. It's because I'm dividing 1 by 0.07, right? When the arts show a coefficient larger than 1, so that's straight up saying 1 arts here, you know, 6 non-arts jobs over there. So yeah, well, I have one more conclusion that I wanted to show. The NEA reported this after the COVID pandemic, you know, that the arts economy shed more than 500,000 jobs, and 40% of those was because of declines in motion pictures and video production, performing arts. the the value added by performing arts presenters fell by nearly 72% during the pandemic. The new construction of cultural arts and cultural facilities declined by 24%, museums by 22%, independent artists, writers, performers by 20%, motion picture and video production by 17.9%. Remember, like when Netflix stopped, like showing new things, like adding new things, like yeah. But in comparison, TV and radio broadcasting fell by only 1.5%, and publishing industries changed very little in those years. Can you go to the next one? So this is
multiple methods. Okay.
yes, but this is like something that I'm concerned about. That after all this study, the pandemic lockdown and remote work has changed the way that people pursue like their dynamics in the cities. People decided to go rural and buy houses in Wyoming, and like the people in Wyoming couldn't buy houses in their own tiny cities because all these people from California were paying like extraordinary amounts of money for them. So what's going to happen now that people has especially like people with money have these different perceptions on how to live? It's going to be interesting to explore, especially the downtown, the abandoned downtown areas in major cities. For example, I work in the Loop, and it's still a little bit depressing. Like Old Navy is not there. Other storefronts are closed. I see more stores and retail and more restaurants, like more alive in the suburbs now. I heard that St. Louis looks very abandoned. So I don't know what's going to happen to the big cities now that people had a taste of this other side of it. Or how many years it will take for it to bounce back?
Will it ever?
Will it ever?
That's the question.
Yes. So thank you for listening to me. And thank you for your questions.
Thank you for the presentation.
Yeah.
So she's presented this in how many professional meetings? Lots of these, but almost nothing published. So this is what she really has just finished her PhD and time for more things. So she's going to publish soon.
Yeah. I finished them. Yeah, maybe write a book.
Yeah.
Depends on Professor Clark. Yeah, I finished in 2021, and I've been working for Chicago Public Schools ever since. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of mapping for them and data analysis for them. So no, it might be time to come back.
Any other questions? Okay, well, good questions and discussion. So this is good
Thank
for
you.
all. Okay, thank you, Christina. She's been a TA in this class, so she knows how we've done it and others, and so any thoughts or questions about how do the arts interact with any of the let's say the anti-patriarchal ideologic, that is, for instance, I was working at the Urban Institute in Washington, and there was a national organization for women appealed to most the professionals in the building and in the signs in the elevators clearly were appealing to professional women. After a day or two, there were, I think they're African American women who said, we feel we are not being represented by NOW, and we would prefer to spend more time with our families, not having these kinds of demands to being pushed to be higher position within this organization. We don't want to be a high position. We want to spend more time at home with our families. And so in that sense, we have, and I'm citing this obviously from a highly specialized source, but even that is, these are not people who are silent. These are people who are actively fighting against each other on elevators over, and so then where and how the arts might be used. This is what their chapters that Dan Silver and I did, and to contrast Toronto and Chicago, how the arts got politicized and used by an alderman, city council member in Toronto, and then where and how under Harold Washington the first arts plan was adopted by the city of Chicago. And so they wanted to try to have, I went to a 1-hour presentation by a young lawyer who went around, he spent a year, he went around to every aldermanic ward in the city of Chicago. And he did not go to the aldermen initially, he went to the arts groups. And he found arts groups in every single one of the 50 wards. And they then took their cases to their aldermen and said, you know, we have people here who are meeting and they're doing finger painting with kindergartners. We have people who are 14-year-olds who do who raise horses together, or that is maybe not horses, but let's say they work as interns in art galleries, or we have relationships with our big art institutions and so forth. These arts groups went to their aldermen then after they found by the young lawyer, when the alderman then realized that there was lots of art interest among their constituents, and it was something like 45 out of the 50, maybe even more, of all of the aldermen in Chicago embraced this arts plan for the first time under Harold Washington. So these kinds of things have been politically mobilized in a manner which is not quite Tocqueville, but how do we capture this? Is it a new social movement? Is it a new social movement? Is it a scene? Is it a union? Is it a political are these political leaders, including the aldermen, who had to be persuaded, but who once persuaded, they voted in favor of it. So in this sense, if we remember our discussion of these units, and my basic conclusion is we have all of these going on around us today, and so Tocqueville in that sense has been generalized. That is, if Tocqueville's outsider looking for how things work, I think he would end up with the same conclusion, that we can find all of these things going on now, whereas in small towns in Massachusetts in 1810, there would be many fewer of those options available. And he left out a lot, which was even there. Okay. And of course, as you know, I'm talking about this and invited Christina because the rise of the arts and its political and social and economic impacts this is a huge discovery. Most social scientists have ignored this. Have you heard this in any class you've ever had at the University of Chicago?
No, I don't.
Have you, Sharon?
Maybe not.
Okay.
I think I learned something from urban sociology class, but not that much.
But about the arts, the specific point about the arts.
And I think it's about entertainment or something.
Okay. Which urban course was that?
I think it's by Marco Garrido.
Okay.
I can't remember exactly.
Okay. Well, I'm paying attention to it for everyone in this class, especially and so there's plenty of economics data, methods, examples, jobs which you featured in your oral presentation, which I think directly or directly compelling to and we have a number of economics students in the class. There are 30 students who, most of whom will have the videos of this, so this is fine. But the drivers of this have been mayors and policymakers driving. That is, it maybe takes 100 mayors to drive one academic to change his mind. Okay, so in that sense, I won't go into more about too much on the micro, but I'll end only with say with I went to the director of research of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago and said, you know, you're not talking, you're only talking about jobs. You're not talking about consumption, and many people come here to shop and go to the restaurants, to go to the hotels, and you're not bringing this out. And he said, you know, that's a good point. So he came to one of our sessions at a professional meeting. He was persuaded, having heard much very, very early versions of what Christina's talking about, and he then in turn organized the one-day conference with me and Ed Glazer, and that led to their really incorporating this into their continuing focus through. So that, as you know, each Federal Reserve Bank has some very different kinds of themes, and they disagree, in part and so that the city of Chicago is the major leader in the arts for the whole Midwest, and in terms of some things, it's the national leader in the whole U.S. in terms of daily too, embracing things. So we worked as consultants with the National Endowment for the Arts for 3 years actively, with all kinds of data available for every zip code, every grant from the NEA, et cetera, and Chicago often was number one in the U.S. And that's a total change from the people who think this is Al Capone and nothing else. So
I think in the general analysis, if you look at the tables in my dissertation, Chicago is number one in arts attract jobs.
I'd forgotten that.
For the top 50, there is some small town that surpasses it. I don't understand, but yeah, Chicago is number one in the biggest urban areas.
Yeah, for even a little presentation like this, that's compelling. Maybe showing a couple of individual names, and you, in your discussion, for instance, mentioning the Sioux City was compelling in the same way that Chicago is right now. Okay. All right. So that's the diverting a little bit on that. We had from George, you said you had a couple of questions, but we maybe
No,
sure.
we can. I just got a couple questions about this.
Could we turn at least one or two cameras on?
This book, the cultural theory.
Who's the editor or author?
The cultural theory, and the author is Michael Thompson, Richard Ellis, and Aaron Wilnowski.
Yes. And we're mainly going to talk about that Wednesday.
Ah, okay.
I would say if there's something quick and simple, maybe let us know. But I'm planning on more earlier today.
Let's talk on Wednesday.
Okay.
And then we'll touch on this on Wednesday as well.
No, today was Durkheim. So go ahead if you have a question on Durkheim. Go ahead and ask now.
No, my question were mainly on this guy, so I'll wait until Wednesday.
Okay.
Because I found this book to be very interesting.
Yes, no, that's why there's a lot of it there. I mean, it's a very good, it's an excellent book.
There are many questions about this one, so I will wait for Wednesday.
Good. Okay. Let me just dig out my notes here for this.
And then he mentioned this person as well.
crowd and the
We'll talk about this on Wednesday.
psychology. Okay, so Gustave Le Bon. Okay.
We'll talk about him on Wednesday, right?
No, I'd say that's good for now. Go ahead. I mean, this is history. This is the background. That is. I'm going to talk a little bit about general background leading up to present, because most of. But so go ahead if you have a question on Le Bon.
Well, yes, I do have a question about him, and
I think it was Edward Shills that translated that. I think it was that one. But I'm
then
not
he's
sure.
another book of his, The Psychology of Revolution.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, The Psychology of Revolution.
Who's that by?
By the same author, Le Bon.
Le Bon. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So he basically says that people, when they get into the crowds, I have it here, and
Is the camera on him?
let me get this specific where he mentions.
So Le Bon wrote in France at the end of the 19th, early 20th century.
Yes.
And the French got very excited and wrote, and so there were a handful of books, and Le Bon was the leading name.
Yeah.
And I would make a point, in a sense, a corollary of, but go ahead, you ask your
But
question, Ron.
the question, I mean, his main argument is that when people are in crowds, they totally forget about their morality, right? It goes down. Their fear goes down, because they have this kind of herd mentality, right? And they're able to do things that they have in their mind, but they never thought they could do it. Is that
Yes.
correct? Yeah.
Yes, generally yes.
So is that happens when people protest? They kind of.
It-
Is this what happens when people protest? They become irrational because they have this herd mentality, and they kind of think they're too idealistic. Is that what he's trying to tell us?
Well, clearly it's one hypothesis, but he and other people like Gabriel Tard, who started to talk about this, were saying let's try to understand it. But the main point is we have minimal theory, we have minimal serious research on these issues, and so we have a book in progress called Latin Scenes, and the general idea is that many mechanisms such as the crowd, the cafe, a gang, a street corner gang, which is more of a scene involving people together, are things which the whole concept of scene we began to focus on, because it is more important not only for narrow leisure but also for politics, for social organization, for new kinds of activities and in terms of politics, the examples were cited in Egypt. We had the president of Egypt resigned when there were protest activities by young people, whereas 10-20 years before, when there were protest activities, or the most dramatic that's been documented, say in Mexico, as I mentioned in class, when you had protest activities like this in Mexico, they'd send in the army and they'd kill everybody who was there. And so the French, Madame Mitterrand and the sociologist Alain Touraine mobilized, and they had 2 buses of people who went to a small town in Mexico, and Mexican media, and that completely reversed the treatment, the culture that you can kill people if they protest. And since then, the Indian Mexican ethnic group, which had been totally outside the political system, was ignored and killed if they became active. They have become treated in terms of affirmative action, and as a minority like African Americans in the U.S. as getting some huge political political success across Mexico. So in that sense, these things are changing in drastic ways, related perhaps to cell phones, or say 5 years, what was it, roughly 5 years ago, we had cell phones and the American police being labeled by Black Lives Matter, and the mobilization of African Americans in many cities demonstrating against the police, including, destroying the storefronts of Michigan Avenue, the North Michigan Avenue shops. These kinds of things had elements of that in 1968 before, but very minimally. That is, these are now spreading around the world, and we haven't had anybody resign as president, but these are causing dramatic changes in agendas in national as well, and definitely in local politics. Go ahead.
Question?
Yes.
Who's doing research on crowd behavior, and who is the Le Bon of today?
I wish I could give you a clear answer. But one person, the one person and the one and right here in Pick Hall, is a professor of political science here, whose name I'm blocking on. I know his title. He's the Sidney Stein Professor of Political Science and Public Policy, and he's very good at getting I'm blocking on his name, but he's doing a survey of the anti-Semitism and the Muslim and Jewish groups on American universities and campuses. He has, I think, about 1,000 campuses. He's surveying the students, the administrators, and others about how these are active across the United States and how they've changed campuses right now. And so this week, Columbia has stopped classes, and they're having online classes because of the degree of violence and the threats of violence in Columbia. When I was a grad student, I was there I think it was I trained the leaders in the year before '68, and so so Berkeley and Columbia were the two places that were the leaders in student protest, but Paris as well, and we now have things like this having all around the world, even in Hong Kong. That is the national police had. I would point out that is, I had students at the time at Tiananmen Square, and there's a book by Ding Xiao on Tiananmen Square, but with Tiananmen Square, the police and the army immediately, started shooting, and they used force and violence immediately. With Hong Kong, I spent Saturday night 3 hours with a presentation on youth culture in Beijing, and how is the youth culture changing, and so I have in mind in the back from the international press of the Hong Kong protests, which went on for months and months, and the police barely intervened. That is, this was a total reversal of what happened under Tiananmen Square, and so I would say what I read for that, and I'm not sure how you saw this in the Chinese press, which you may have covered, or media more than I did. I quoted the German visitor in '68 in Chicago. It was really '69 for the Bobby Kennedy assassination, when we had the destruction of many buildings in Chicago, and he looked out the door, looked out the glass, the windows, burning in Chicago, and said, if this happened in Germany, it would be a national crisis. But this shows how confident and how much democracy is established as a culture in the U.S. in ways that was not true in Germany. I'd say that is a change in China, in the sense that there's more stability and confidence in the the amount of trust, when we look at one of the, I'm not sure if it's in what we have in the readings, but the trust level in terms of countries in the world, one of the highest is China. And so Carrie Wu, who has worked with us on this, he's done several papers on trust for his PhD and other things, especially in China, because he's Chinese. And so to understand where and how legitimacy and trust operate in a generally authoritarian political, and so my follow-up is, it depends on the issue area and depends on the leadership, but nevertheless, the general point I'm making is we have very little good work. It's too new, or that is, it's too new, and it's too new for the serious social science. Something like, I don't have numbers now, but something like 70% of all active social scientists in the world are in the U.S. So we're very biased. We're very biased for national, in terms of population of the world. We get very U.S. biased kinds of research. So this is, nevertheless, the French have spend a lot more on research and social science research, and they spend a lot more on consumption, lifestyle, tourism, and so forth. So you get tourism, but also leading into these other kinds of activities, including serious reviews of these kinds of things with the French. But if you ask me, is there a Laban, the answer earlier on in the history of sociology was Gabriel Tarde. I edited a book on Gabriel Tarde. He was the main challenger competitor of Emil Durkheim at the time. So they were competitors, and so Tarde was a judge in a criminal court, and he saw a lot of violence, and the second big point, which I'll feed into this, and I'm maybe doing this in part because my PhD was on the rise of the social sciences in France, and so Durkheim was the major figure. So where and how the other people around him disagreed and why. So I studied 3 other groups. I did content analyses of their journals, social backgrounds of them, et cetera. But the point is, Tarde did a lot more original quantitative analysis of criminal and violent kinds of activities, as well as qualitative long books right on all different kinds of. His most famous book is called The Law of Imitation. But things like crowds were close to this. And this also was going on after it was roughly after 1904, I think was the year. Durkheim was the most compelling national public intellectual in many respects. That is, he is a social scientist. The others were maybe Zola, or a couple of novelists were visible, but Durkheim was teaching teachers across all of France, and he wrote books which came out afterward and had a major impact on these sorts of issues. He lost his whole audience after 1904, and there was a dramatic change within France and within Germany. 10 years later was the beginning of World War I, and those last years, you saw a rise of these mobs, demonstrations, emotion coming to politics in a powerful way that are analogous to what we have today in some respects, surrounding with Black Lives Matter, the diversity discussions, and so forth in Europe, and of course immigration. So immigration is a number one issue. It has been in Europe for probably 30 plus years. So it's become more violent, more active, more numerous, and so forth. As we have, say, the Netherlands is no longer, the Netherlands, I believe, now has a majority of its citizens are Muslims. And in Germany, it's almost the same. So we've had a dramatic transformation in the cultural background, and this is considered politically incorrect to talk about. to the degree that you virtually never see this in the American press. That they say, and so the book which does do this is on a reading list called Terrified. So, which is the rise of anti-Muslim sentiment among American political leaders, and where and how this was driven by organized groups, media, etc., social media and the like. And so I would say maybe I should come back. I'd say that's the best analog today of Le Bon, and Rich. I mean, he's closer to what Christina's doing by comparison than Le Bon did. Yeah. Go ahead.
Follow-up question. But if you look at history, correct me if I'm wrong, before World War One, violence came from the military, but after World War One,
No.
The origins.
These were crowds.
Yeah.
The Durkheimians would come with sticks, and they would hit people in the streets right there almost every week.
So the origin of modern violence are the crowds, are the protest.
Well, and it could be that the state leaders in France, at least, could indeed bring in the police as well. So the Haussmann's rebuilding of the city of Paris, the critics, such as Benjamin, the Marxist writer on those, would say, and Haussmann himself said, one could consider the creation of these big, wide, straight boulevards would be a way that we could suppress revolution if it would be attempted, and which would be built on these little narrow streets where they would block the access by the police or the big cars or the cavalry, and so having those across Paris, and then they literally drove out the most sort of homeless, etc. After 1789, 1848, but those were the clear examples of military type violence. But the counterpart was of course 1789, the guillotine. They killed off over something like 1,400 of the top political leaders, the king, all the people of the top court. They were publicly guillotined day after day after day, and celebrated with crowds cheering, etc. So in that sense, well, my collaborator Clemente Navarro in Seville has a book basically on crowds, where he has citizen surveys, and show that there are many more active participation in street activity by active citizens in Spain than is true by far of Northern Europeans or Americans.
Last question.
But the point is, this is coming to the U.S., it's coming to Canada, it's coming to Hong Kong inside China today. And so see where and how these are important for part of political sociology to pay attention to, just as are the arts, precisely because they're not studied. And so that is minimally, but that's why we do have the handful of readings that are here. But they're important for us to talk about here in the classroom, even if precisely to try to encourage people to do some serious research, such as Christina has done today. But go ahead, you had something else on Spain.
Yeah, the last question is, are there any alternative to protest, to express opposition to the government? Because all opposition to the government is coming now, is channels to protest. Do we have any other alternative options?
No, I would say the one of the historic examples which inspired me to work on scenes was the medieval and Renaissance period of the Roman Catholic neighborhoods in Spain, where the neighborhood churches would organize parades in Holy Week. And if you want some of the most dramatic, fantastic parades, especially places like Seville.
Yes.
And some of the southern, and these are political. These are so Holy Week is for the church. They're organized by the priests and by others, and parades are there. But you then have, especially in those that are more organized, you'll have hundreds of people who will be neighborhood bands and neighborhood dance groups and floats, and then huge crowds cheering them, and because they're supporting one or another band or one or another float representing one neighborhood competing with another. And these go back to, so even though these were, we can call them effervescent kinds of activities, and some of them literally were burned at the end of the day, it's a highly effervescent scene, dramatic for its short volatility, and longevity is tiny, and yet they were the celebration of what was built up for an entire year. So these are activities which have a cultural tradition, and I'll add. One year I arrived in Spain, and I saw watched it on the Spanish television. I watched the Holy Week performances across all of Spain, because this is standard stuff. And they would interview the mayors and the people organizing this, and where and why they were doing it. And one example was, there is one city which had a number of persons who were working with or supporting by former leader Franco and the Spanish Foreign Legion. And it has each year has a ship come into the port. I think it's Malaga, and so you know about it.
Yeah.
And so you have the Spanish Foreign Legion in their full uniforms march down with their guns down the gangplank. They come into the city. They then hold a parade, but on the parade they carry the Christ, the cross with Christ on, and it's a 10-foot, 15-foot huge cross with a sculpture on a cross of Jesus Christ, carried by the Spanish Foreign Legion, and this is the center focus of the legitimacy of the Spanish Foreign Legion, Christianity being celebrated by the church, linked together with Franco and legitimating under the trying or whatever, but in the whole Spanish Civil War, when people like Ernest Hemingway went all the way to Spain and fought in the French in the Spanish Civil War and wrote about it, etc., as a journalist and novelist. So, in that sense, where and how legitimacy? I mean, the big question. So that is this is my deliberate introduction to the importance of political culture in this section of the course. So it's been implicit in some earlier sections, but now this is why it really makes a dramatic difference. If you have Durkheim, if you will, with this idea of a rational analysis of where and how we keep people together, what's my time here? Oh my God, we're over time. So let me terminate there. So we will continue on Wednesday. Take a look in what's there. But this your questions are excellent, and I've taken off from them. But in that sense, I have incorporated your questions into the main introduction to this section, which I wanted to present, which we now have here. Okay. See you Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you, Christina.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your questions.